Um, really looking forward to Fireside today. Just a very brief note on the way. I just want to say thanks to everyone for participating as best as you can in Kernel. Many of the people that I see on the call here have already signed up for at least one office hours. You've come to a one-on-one, you've been at a fireside, and in general, hopefully you've been feeling a bit of what we're trying to bring together and make happen with a kernel block. And most important to that is uh, engaging with you on your most important work. And so um, the expo sign up, I put a little note in the chat. I would just encourage everyone, if you're willing, it's just basically a continuation of office hours, but it is a secondary, like kind of like halfway checkpoint of the block. That's another way that you can think about it. It's the Midway Expo, and it's an event that's a semi-public. So the sign up link is not just a Google sheet; it's a Convo link, which subtly but importantly is a link that you can share. So please feel free to share the Convo link to collaborators, potential collaborators, friends, people that you think might be interested in the work that you're presenting, um, and consider signing up. We're going to do April 1st and 2nd, which are Tuesday and Wednesday, respectively. And it really kind of marks, I would say, like a new phase. It's like kind of before and after Expo, and like Expo itself, it helps us solidify like where we going into the end of the block, and hopefully towards some of the projects and ideas going on well beyond the block is the hope. So the um, the themes are more or less like what we will say for a few words at the beginning. We called session 1 on April 1st the pluriverse, and session 2 trust spaces. Effectively, we're just going to say a few words on those themes to bring people into the space together. But it should make no impact on what day you choose. It should be chosen based on which day is more convenient to you. So April 1st, which is a Tuesday, and April 2nd, which is Wednesday. Um, great. Um, take back the web. This is a turning point in the syllabus. It's one of our last explicit kind of like looks back before the rest of the syllabus, module 4 on internet age institutions, and then onwards kind of starts the flipping where we start to turn forward to where we think we can go from here. But take back the web. We had a really vibrant discussion about at the Junto yesterday, and I'm hopeful that this just feels like a continuation. It starts with trying to imagine like what is the type of web that you feel good participating in. What would be the way that it would be structured best, such that when we're online and we're with one another here on our screens, we might end up feeling like our life is being augmented, and that generally speaking, that the web is acting as our friend. And I think everyone here has probably had the experience that the web has in many ways been a magical place, and perhaps in other ways has been a place that's been a confronting place to be, or at least speaking for myself, I've definitely had my struggles with some of the feeds that our modern web are based on. And what we want to do today is look at some of the principles of the web and really like the details of how it it works, while also looking forward and remembering a few pillars, at least that we're putting out and that I hope we can extend in this conversation as what the best web feels like. And our three starting points were uh, the web at its best augments our ability to think for ourselves. Maybe it gives us a Google search or a Reddit link or now a ChatGPT query where we can get answers, be in dialogue. Um, it helps us reclaim our time. It's a tool like any other tool intended to just improve our quality of life and give us our time back to do other things if we're successful. And then the third is it extends our ability to cooperate. The third pillar is the pillar that seems most to do with other people and how we engage with and cooperate. The first two perhaps a bit more on the personal side. Um, there's a whole module here on freedom, and I just want to say a few words on it, because we are kind of poking at this module that um, there is um, a value in having a definition for terms like freedom for yourself or for what you think it is, and that our internal state when we're engaging with the web and trying to build a better one matters too. And there's a couple of parts here that seem to stand out. The in the junto and in general, it first was freedom is the simple combination of awareness and acceptance. It is here and now or not at all. And then there was a really beautiful part yesterday where we really talked about limits and constraints and how those relate to freedom. And here's a part influenced by Von Illich that says, it is only the willing acceptance of limits, a sense of enoughness, that can stop monopolistic institutions from appropriating the totality of Earth's available resources in their constant quest for growth. That's an interesting point, I suppose, on the global scale. But this idea of willing acceptance of constraints also came up in conversation at the local scale. And so what we want to do today is like poke at these three pillars, consider how the web is helping in these ways, augmenting our ability to think for ourselves, helping reclaim our time, and extending our ability to cooperate, and really hopefully have a better understanding of just like what the web actually is. When we say the word web and we're talking about the internet, what are we actually talking about? And in Learn Junto yesterday, I feel like uh, everyone who was there felt that there was one place that we could maybe start with that, which is just like how do we see the transition that happens from Web 2 to Web 3, and how can we talk about that the most clearly? That at least came up kind of naturally when Akasha started sharing some of her understandings. And over the course of the Learn Junto, I think the feeling was maybe we should just take a few minutes and see if Akasha can help us in Fireside to outline that and see if that drives us into a more clear discussion about what we're talking about when we're talking about the web. So I want to welcome Akasha. This is the first Fireside. This block, every block it happens where it becomes a bit more of an internal dialogue, and I think Acacia is going to help us really, really well to start off. So thank you for preparing and helping us with Take Back the Web.
Of course. Yeah. I think, like you said, the conversation from Junto yesterday was so good and so interesting. And it's also, it was very relatable to the project that I brought to Kernel. So it was an exciting conversation for me. I'm hoping that I'm already excited for this conversation. I feel like everybody's going to be so much fun. But I'm hoping that I can have this conversation from a technical perspective, but it's not a technical talk. So everybody should feel comfortable with the ability to kind of follow this this broader intuition for what we mean when we define the web, and some of the future iterations of where I think Web3 can go. And then I want to just like talk about where I'm trying to take it as well. Like I said, this is not a technical talk, so the technical people here just have a little bit of grace with me because I may make one or two generalities in the process, but it's something I'm more than willing to talk about, whether it's can Slack me and tell me I was wrong, or you can speak up and kind of we can talk about it more in depth on the particulars and how we define each section. So I think that the content on Kernel did a really effective job of giving us a sense of like these sections of Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Like I said, I want to take it in a more technical way. So I'm going to focus on Web 2 and Web 3. And I did also just add in here, Crypto Wanderer did a really good post in, I forget the Slack channel, but he talked about the idea of read, write, sign, which is another perspective on read, write, own that we have in Web3, where our ability to sign transactions and sign ownership over things is what allows us to own our data. So it starts to add this perspective on how do we rethink architecture in the Web3 space differently than the way that we think about architecture from the Web2 space. So the Web2 experience is great because we made it great. We actively started with a few assumptions. And when I say user experience, the developer experience, which is very crucial, the developer's ability to build good product gives you the ability to interact with those products. So providing a really good developer experience is just as important as providing a good experience as a consumer. And so we'll switch between both of those contexts here. But with Web 2, we created browsers and operating systems, and we have cookies, and we had on the server side, we have like load balancers and cloud compute and databases, which are a special type of server. Load balancers are also just a special type of server. We've customized all of these systems to operate in the Web2 environment that we know today. But it's really based on this cornerstone assumption that we have a client that in like basically sends data over the internet into a backend server. And for a long time, this made a lot of sense because let's say you were booking a flight, it's important for the Southwest airline or whoever to have your information about who's taking the flight and you know how many people are booked on the plane. These fundamental questions were easiest answered by just taking data and processing it on the server side to process and understand what the needs were on like the business side of things. I do think that that logic, that core foundational assumption, stops serving us effectively when we start thinking about the high levels of interactivity that we have with things like social media. Social media is something where you want to connect really like peer to peer, or you think about Google, who's actually just actively taking all of your data. I worked in finance where I dealt with third-party data integration, which was basically a subset of a data reseller. most people don't realize that there's about a $400 billion industry of data reselling that happens between all major companies. You can intake user data and you make decisioning on it. And a lot of major institutions also leverage third-party services to make decisioning on you. So it kind of went from this environment where we took the necessary data from the client to the server in order to book a flight to we now have a $400 billion industry that is moving your data around without your permission. And I think that is something that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with. A lot of people are also very uncomfortable with the fact that once your data is with that institution, you no longer have control. So they can shut down your account, they can block your ability to do things. That control is what makes people uncomfortable. And I think was the impetus for something like Web3. Web3 has very different foundational assumptions and an expectation that systems adhere to them. So I'm not going to get into the working details of Byzantine and fault tolerance and consensus protocol and those sorts of things. But Web3's border, like just base assumption is we want to be able to coordinate without the prerequisite of trust and without the prerequisite of a centralized owner. So we want to be able to interact in a social media like capacity without having to trust the people who are putting the social media components together and making that system work. And I think that's where the ownership comes back is like the ownership is more of a responsibility of like, I'm willing to take on the ownership over my data to ensure that I have all of my rights and my abilities and my freedoms. So that's the mental model that at least I have when I think about these systems. And I also want to keep up the chat. And I would also say, like, if it's okay with the Colonel Stewards, if everybody can just unmute themselves and have a conversation. I think some of the, I think this is a good point. The Web 2 user experience from Oliver, he says the Web 2 user experience actually sucks. It's been around long enough that it's interesting enough for us to focus on. We've gotten used to it. Right. We've started to think, this is a great point that I think we've started to think in Web 2. So even in the conversation we're having in the Junto yesterday, we we were like, oh, well, in order to interact with Web3 data, we have to take it off chain and index it. And it's like, no, that's a standard that came from Web 2. It came from this idea that we had a client and a server. And you with a server, you have data stored in a database, right? And so you can query that data. So we think in queries because that's the architecture from Web 2. And when we actually interact, and I forget, I think it was Max who brought up this really good point of like thinking in heaps. When we interact, most of the time we want the most current information. When you scroll on your feed, you're not looking for, most of the time, you're not looking for a tweet that happened 10 years ago. You're looking to see what people are currently doing. If you think about the context of your day-to-day interaction to find that they're really a small window of interactivity and data that you require. When you log onto your bank account, you want to see your current balance. You might go for accounting purposes and look back and want to see that maybe transaction that you made 3 months ago because you're doing your taxes. But for the most part, we care about our most recent data. Um,
I
If
think
exactly.
yeah, if
so.
go ahead, go
I'll
ahead.
I'll double down on my point and expand it into finance because you just touched on it, which
Take it
is
there.
like so to the extent that crypto is maybe a money system. Like, people love to, even people in the space love to dump on it and be like, yeah, crypto is so not ready for like normies. Like it's so hard. The SRP thing, the seed phrase, nobody can remember it, and the private keys and the blah blah blah. And I'm like, when was the last time that you had to send a wire transfer? When was the last time that you had to get your bank to authorize you to spend $2,000 on a plane ticket, because I've done a couple of those things in recent years, and it's a fucking nightmare. And like the legacy banking system is no less complex and awful than crypto. And so then it's like, oh, so are we just replacing one awful with another? And it's, the conversation continues. But a lot of the time, we're just used to the bad technology or the rough around the edges, right?
Right.
And the critiques of Web3's UX are valid, but I feel like only for as far as they go, right? Because we're all used to the bad UX from the oldest version of technology, and it's all iterative anyway. All right, I'll stop.
No, I think that's a good point. I think there are like some, so the thing about finance, because I know there's a lot of people in Web3 who are like, yeah, I worked on, like high frequency transactions, or they worked on like trading and different things like that. I worked on the part of finance where we did risk mitigation, the not so fun part of finance where we were answering a host of different questions. And so in the finance space, you have teams dedicated to risk, identity management, and decisioning. You have Nacha that runs in the background, which is a state machine, by the way. Nacha is a big state machine that all the banks relay between, just like blockchains are state machines. You have obviously like promotion, you have just all these things. Basically, what I'm saying is, yes, there are conveniences in the Web2 finance space, but I would say like greater than 70% of those inconveniences are sort of offset to the server side. When you look at Web3, uh, there's a balance, right? And that's why I say when you own things, you also have more responsibility. So there are inconveniences in the Web3 space that people aren't comfortable with because it's an increased responsibility. That's my
Yeah.
hot take.
I think that's something we can come back to. I think occasionally maybe a few more slides because I know you have a lot of good stuff here, if you're willing, and we can have people raise hands, and I'll try to help encourage people to chime in if you have.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So like we said, Web3 has these different foundational assumptions, the ability to coordinate without the prerequisite of trust and no centralized owner. This is very hard, both again, like from a technical side and then from a user experience side. You're offsetting, you're reweighting ownership over the data, and then computationally to make sure that everybody can coordinate even without knowing each other or in a trust verifiable way, which I think is really great how Colonel describes it, is a harder problem to solve. That's not to say, to Oliver's point, that we haven't created a decentralized web. It's just that that user experience doesn't mirror Web 2. And so there's a little bit of this like pushback between, do we create a rules and expectations, or do we wanted from Web 2 and the reason why we did all this innovation in the Web 2 space? I think the reason why Web 3 doesn't feel quite like Web 2 yet is because a fully on-chain experience is comprised of two sections. I gave this talk in the office hours on the first weeks, and that's linked there if you guys want to look at it more in depth. It was called Building Blockchain Intuition because the Web3 space can essentially be split into these two sections of a protocol and a state machine. Everything is a protocol. If it's not a state machine, if it's not a blockchain, and not an L1 and not an L2, it is a protocol. Even if it's a liquidity pool combines data in one place and allows you to earn rewards for it, right? That is a protocol. The role of a protocol is just to move data from one place to another. So an Oracle takes off-chain data and puts it on-chain. An indexer takes on-chain data and takes it off-chain. A bridge takes data from one state machine to another state machine. Everything that is not a state machine is a protocol, and a protocol's job is just to define the data that it moves and then do that data movement. If it's not that, then it's just a blockchain, which manages and is responsible for what I call like a subset of data. That data is defined as state. So, and in Web3, state is tokens. So I would say that we've achieved this trust verifiable decentralization, but for a subset, for a category of token transitions, uh, over state transitions over tokens. That's the subset that we've created a new web for. The issue or the constraint there is that tokens are restrictive. We're used to being able to stream data. We're used to being able to see historical data. We're used to being able to interact like on social media apps and have custom messaging and ability to add emojis. All of those things cannot be represented as tokens and state transitions over tokens. So a fully on-chain, a fully Web3 experience doesn't quite feel the same as a Web2 experience, both from a developer perspective, the ability to build on-chain, and the user perspective. So sometimes we make compromises, right? Sometimes we say, okay, a protocol and a state machine is not enough. We're going to move towards a sufficiently decentralized capacity, which is where Farcaster is. I think Farcaster are the people who coined sufficiently decentralized, but the idea that not 100% of your application can run just with protocol and state machine alone. You may have to fall back to some of those Web2 defaults of having some off-chain servers, having some like maybe some database compute, and you in some small capacity have to trust the provider, whether it's a wallet provider or it's a service provider, you have to trust them. And then there's other models where people start with a strong Web2 default and they move towards decentralization. So they start centralized. Infura is doing this actively. They're decentralizing the RPC. So RPCs are, again, a protocol that allows your transaction to be sent from the client side to the blockchain. And that process goes through Infura, and they're trying to decentralize that process. Now they have registry, so it's not fully decentralized, but decentralization is a scale in Web3. Another alternative that Adam did a great job of calling out yesterday in the Junto was, well, we have secure off-chain compute, right? Yes, we have some off-chain compute that feels like Web3, but ultimately we can do verifiable compute. And that's why EigenLayer is so interesting, right? EigenLayer is this ability to declare these off-chain like logic and allow operators to kind of check that that logic is occurring appropriately. But I would say beyond EigenLayer, Alio is a really great zero knowledge. Yes, Alio is very interesting because it does off-chain ZK verification, but it also relays it to the blockchain. So you get that same verifiability, the trust verifiability that we like about a fully on-chain experience, but with off-chain compute. That gives us a little bit more like data-rich components. It allows us to have more complex logic that is associated with the Web2 application. Now, ultimately, this kind of, to me, if you look at this architecture, it kind of looks like this to me. It still looks like a client server architecture. And I don't think that's what we want. I think we want a client blockchain architecture. Fundamentally, we want the ability to have more control and ownership. We want the ability to have more transparency. We want the ability to have more interaction personally. And I would love to also like open that up to conversation. I have just a few more slides. So what I think of when I think about this is that we just want to go here. We just want to say, here's my client, here's my computer I interact with on a daily basis, and I want to interact with the blockchain. And so the fundamental of like what I'm working on in kernel and like more broadly on my day-to-day is this kind of mesh ability to encode very robust data onto state transition. So when a state transition occurs, that actually is not just like a binary like token transfer, but it actually represents some broader state change that a developer has been able to specify. So it looks like a state change on chain, and it looks like a representation of things that you can follow on chain. But when you interact with it on the client, it actually shows you it's almost like colored coins, where it shows you this very like interactive interface on what is actually occurring on the blockchain. Because I mean, we use block explorers anyways all the time, and you guys kind of trust that the block explorer is being accurate, and you can run your own node and verify that. But this idea is that you can run this canonical serialization of the state machine, state transition, and also verify through that canonical representation that what you're seeing on chain actually represents this broader and more robust data representation. So the ability to take the architecture of like a message in a messaging app, you have maybe the user that sent the message, you have the body of the message, the time the message was sent, and you can represent that as state on chain. And then that state transition represents different interactions with that message. So taking this kind of like binary encoding and making it multi-dimensional and like non-binary. So this is the basis of what I'm working on. But more broadly, I think my goal is aligned with the broader goal of Web3 is that we want client server interaction. We don't want it to feel like, I mean, we want client blockchain interaction. We don't want it to feel like client server. And we want some of the benefits that we get from Web2 to translate over to Web3. And I think this is where adoption happens more broadly.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Akasha, do you mind if you go back to the web? Maybe, let's see, the web. This is a good one, but back a few more. I just want to start from the jump. One more actually from here. Just to come all the way back to the beginning. I think I want to encourage anyone, especially if you actually weren't at Junto yesterday, if you have questions for Akasha, if you have thoughts, really nothing is off limits. And I think that she's done a really great job getting into the details, and hopefully we get into other details while expressing the high level. And so we focused mostly on Web 2 and Web 3. There was this idea that it's not a trustless thing, this Web 3 thing, it's trust verifiable. And in the image here, hopefully now we can see it's from client to server was Web 2, those two images that Akasha has for the red section. And then in the pink section, you now have the client ideally straight to this blockchain or to this state machine. And this state machine is just we're getting better and better at being able to like communicate directly to the state machine and get information back to our computers. And as a result, you have more interesting possibilities and outcomes. So I really appreciate the visualizations in this because they hopefully help. That it's like it's not so different. There's so many things that we can learn from all of the like hard work that went into load balancers and figuring out how this whole Web2 system could work. There's some parts to remember and learn from, and then there's some things where it's like you really have to unlearn and think new and differently. So I hope we can keep this up for a second, but also open it up to questions. I would love to hear if anyone has even like beginner level all the way across. So please don't.
Vivek, I have a question. Akasha, it was great. Good to see you again. I actually wasn't at the Junto yesterday, but I'm curious about the section on incentives in the doc, especially regenerative incentives, and kind of it's sort of a consensus point that Web2 incentives generally are extractive when it comes to like UGC and our experience in Web2. That, you know, to your point earlier, Akasha, about data reselling, etc. That, you know, I think we all generally agree. We can debate the nuances that Web2 incentives are extractive. So I'm curious about transitioning into kind of distribute or a state machine versus a server, etc. Just like in that transition, does this have anything to do with creating regenerative incentives? So, in other words, I'm asking, like, at the core level of the technology and how Web 2 is designed, and, we focus a lot here on the client server model. Does the client server model contribute to the extractive incentives we experience in Web 2? And is that a nature of like dev decisions that have to be made that end up like exporting the extractive incentives because our back end architecture is very stagnant or rigid, or just like, what are your thoughts on how transitioning to trust verifiable at the back end actually creates the means to have regenerative incentives? If that makes sense.
It makes 100% sense. And I think that's also a question I want to pass to the rest of the group, but I'll answer very briefly. I think once the social medias of the world and the Googles of the world realize, oh, we have all of this data and we can actually do something with it. Like it's now a commodity, it's now oil that we've dug up and we can create value from it, we can extract value from it. Then we had this, like I said, huge market of data aggregation and data reselling services. And yeah, I think in the Web3 space, the ownership is incentivized, right? You have to maybe leverage a protocol or something instead of just doing a native like Google search. You have to log in or something. There's like maybe additional hoops you jump through, but all of those hoops are incentivized. So I do think that there is an ability when we integrate with blockchain, we have the ability to put the payment rails directly into any interaction that we have in a Web3 capacity.
Mm-hmm. Which makes it, I guess we'd argue, makes it less extractive, or has the potential at least to like make things less extractive.
Extractive of what? Of data?
Yeah, of data and of, I mean, just to the thoughts of the reading, like giving us more freedom, all this
So
sort
I think I think I have a potential response to this. At
of.
and this pulls from some explanations I've heard of like but going on that sort of like the evolution of the web, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your question is about how is it that the client server model sets up extractive incentives?
Yes.
And my understanding that I've received from others is that because we're using a client server model, somebody has to pay the bill for the server. And so therefore, like because in the end of the day, we exist in the meat space and the bills have to be paid. The server exists in the real world and runs on the electricity, and you have to upgrade the hardware. Money gets involved at some point, and so therefore, um, you're sort of somewhat beholden to the person providing the thing to you that you're trying to access on their server. And therefore, they're like, well, look, are you going to pay me for this? And you say, no, this is the internet. It should be free. And then they're like, okay, fine. Well, I'm going to put ads in front of you. And then it snowballed from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my understanding
Mm-hmm.
of sort of how that incentive came to be. And so the idea with blockchain is, well, look, everybody's going to pay their way from the beginning, and you can't not. And so it forces you to support I'm going to say it, support the public good of the blockchain um, through its fees. Um, that, that it puts off the extractive capabilities of the network. They're still there.
I also think it doesn't just put them off. I think it also allows them to not snowball because if you think about the different interactions, they could be pennies or less than pennies. Uh, and because of that, people will race to the bottom as opposed to race to the top when it comes to extraction, right?
Did you say just a bit more on race to the bottom there?
Yeah, so I'll use a concrete example. So like YouTube, right? If in the most fair system possible, YouTube is on a decentralized network. and it costs very little to watch a video. But in aggregate, if millions of people watch a video, it could create a good income for that creator. Um, Everyone's incentivized to make that price as low as possible, um, so that because at that point they're competing on both quality and price. And so making that price as low as possible kind of creates a market where everyone's paying what the actual market rate for that content, as opposed to the back room where our data is being extracted by, one of the FANG companies.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, Mike, if you'd like.
Sure. I was actually going to comment on the whole presentation before, but I think we kind of moved to a different topic, and I had some comment on that. And I was thinking that Web 2, it is extractive, obviously, from I think one thing is just its siloed nature, that everyone kind of wants to get their data because that's how they make, like every platform wants to get data because that's how they make the money. Web 3, I don't think we've solved that aspect, that you still need to whatever you build, the protocol itself, the blockchain itself, someone needs to develop it, and someone needs to figure out a way to monetize it, unless you don't care about money. Ethereum right now, you still have like active development of that, and they're trying to figure out ways to, how do you incentivize some way to compensate those people who are working on it actively, because it is a public good. So since we haven't figured that out yet, since we don't have that solution, you're still gonna use extraction in some way. You're just kind of moving it in a different direction, maybe putting it like, how about we tokenize everything? How about we give some of the tokens to the community? But it's still extractive, because you're still thinking, at first it could be, oh, we're just doing it for everyone's benefit. But, once you do it at scale, you start thinking, oh, wait, we can actually make a lot of money by doing, this thing or that thing. And you see it with protocols all the time. You see it with projects all the time. So what I was just wanted to say is that the public goods aspect of it is still something that needs to be solved. At the moment, we have this amazing new technology that allows us to build new things that could potentially solve the public goods aspect of it. But at the moment, we're just offering like a different way of incentivizing, basically extraction, basically incentivizing, we're still talking about ownership of digital things, which to me doesn't really make sense. Like, if you all think about it, if it's digital, you don't need to own it. Like, everyone can have access to it. Why does someone need to like own it? And the reason we think about ownership is because, we think about scarcity. Because scarcity is, that's how exchange, the exchange value works. Unless someone owns something and can kind of exchange it for something else, you have no money being transferred, and then you cannot incentivize its production economically at scale.
Don't you feel like I think there's a line that we would kind of have to define on when something is extractive versus when something is just the necessary like value that you derive from, like a farmer should get paid because they planted the corn, even though corn is maybe a crop that regrows every year. Well, the farmer still did work to plant that and to harvest it, and they should get some value from that effort. And I think it's the same way that if you're a developer and you've spent time building a protocol, you should be compensated for that. That is your work that you wake up every day and do. Just because your farming is digital now, it doesn't mean that it's any less of a value add to the community that you're providing it to.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. But you can say the same thing about Web2 platforms. You can say, well, they provide the server, they provide the developers who, build the protocol and maintain everything, shouldn't they get paid in some way? The question is, what is that way, and how do we make that way that it's not like that process is not extractive, that it doesn't create this perverse incentives.
Yeah.
Like you can say, yes, a farmer creates stuff, therefore, obviously people who want food, pay them for that. But if the mechanism by which this process works is harmful, like if you say, well, for a farmer to make food, someone needs to like take over some village, empty it of money, and then compensate the farmer for it. It's like, wait a minute, that's crazy. And that's kind of what we, it's not a perfect analogy. Obviously, it's a crazy analogy at this point, but you don't want the perverse incentives, which is what we have right now in Web 2, and also in a sense what we're trying to avoid in Web 3, but we haven't avoided them yet. We're still creating kind of ways that are not aligned with creating value, but rather like different ways around it.
I see hands up, so I'm gonna but really quickly, I just want to say, somebody asked in the chat, why do we need everything on chain, or why do I envision this system where it's client blockchain? It's because people should have transparency. It's not necessarily that we can ever disincentivize malicious behavior. It's that, for one, we can coordinate in the face of malicious behavior, and two, that we have transparency to see the actions that people are taking. So if somebody built a system with the tools that I'm developing, it's fully transparent. You can see everything, and you can choose to hey, I'm not okay with this process, I'm going to opt out of usage of this product. You don't get that today. You don't get to see how the farmer does things and how much he buys things for. You don't see that full system. I think if we put, glass instead of a wall there, we get a lot farther in making the right incentives in this space.
Maybe if it's okay, we go to Sophie first, and then we can come back to John, Justin.
Okay, hi, thank you. Well, I'm going to try to order my ideas a little because I'm okay. I wanted to say something maybe related to the user's perspective. And what has been on my mind is maybe it's all about balance, no? Maybe it's all about how do we tell the users what are what are the benefits of transparency and data ownership and everything, and make them understand a practical benefit. Because okay, right now in Web2 platforms and Web2 social media, most users have built their communities there. A lot of them are making money out of these communities, maybe not directly from the platforms, but it is a result that comes after the platforms. I mean, maybe I am in a Facebook group chat and I sell secondhand clothes and I make all of the arrangements directly on Facebook, but we meet on the street and I do all my activities on the street. So the benefits of using the social media, the Web2 social media, are really clear to me, because to me, well, not to me, Sophie, but to me as a regular user, let's say, the benefits of using social media are really clear to me, because this is the thing I do for living, even though I don't get my payments directly from Facebook or social media, Web2 social media. But I know that these activities that I do here generate something else in the real world. I will say real world because internet is real too. But I think that's the perceived benefit. So if someone comes and say, hey, but you're selling all of your data to Facebook, Meta and everything. Hey, but you don't really own this. Hey, but blah blah blah. I think the answer that we would probably get would be, yeah, but this is where I work. Yeah, but this is the price to pay. And even we can see it whenever Facebook shuts down. or whenever someone gets their accounts closed or whatever, they create a new one. I mean, they don't think of, okay, I'm going to look up another social media. No, they go and create a new one, and they let everyone knows that they let everyone know, all of their contacts, that they created a new account, so they can continue with the relationships. I think the key in that case would be community, and also incentivizing, which it was already covered here, and I think that's one of the big differentiators. I don't know if that's a word in English, but okay. I think incentivizing the use of social media, and showing these clear benefits, uh, but benefits on a practical way. Like, okay, I'm going to change your life with this. Transparency, it's going to affect your life or benefit your life in this way. Your social media won't shut down every month. You won't have to do this, blah, blah, blah. Like, um, incentivizing, and also community, because that's why people are using social media, even though it has a horrible UX or whatever. They use it because that's where people is. So community and incentivizing are the key for me, and showing these practical benefits, like beyond data ownership, that maybe we understand, but the truth is we are not the majority of people out there.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but Vivek just put something really good in the chat about like our broader goals for Web3. And I think the third point he listed, extending our ability to cooperate, is why people eventually would choose a Web3 system. I think about the next big thing that's coming out of the Web3 space is intents. And imagine a user's ability to put out an intent that says, I want secondhand clothes. And they can get that intent resolved through the blockchain without having to go off and hustle on the Facebook pages and find the right pages and that sort of thing. I think there's a growth pattern here.
Get caught on a feed and accidentally spend 20 minutes. That's at least to me. But
Exactly. Translate that, like do that translation of, okay, you can keep selling your second hand clothes, but you don't have to leave your house now, or you don't have to go to the subway, do a 2-hour ride, and get, like translating. Well, yeah, that's my point. Thank you.
Yeah. Of course. John, and then Bradley at some point. Justin, for sure. John, if you'd like. Unfortunately, I think. Can we hear John? Not quite yet. Might, if you don't mind, John, maybe we'll get back to you for sure.
Is any better?
It's better, yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm on a bike ride. I really appreciate this conversation, and it's I can say I've spent the last 7 years trying to figure out what Web3 is, and I wouldn't say I'm fully satisfied yet. But I have been trying to put together my thoughts in a post about how I'm kind of starting to see it, which is really as a set of design principles or something like that. And I'm curious to offer the 3 that I've come up with to the group and just hear. I think it relates to this this conversation, but I think some thoughts I had on this question about extraction. It feels like it might be looking at the system in quite a limited scope. And one question I might kind of reverse and pose back to the group is Web 2 net extractive? And I don't think that's really answerable, but I think it's really important to acknowledge the ways in which it's creating value and regenerative, and for all these reasons we've kind of talked about, including for the users. People who set up servers are providing a service, and that service is actually a really powerful and important one that is kind of borne out in all of the ways in which the world has benefited and improved in the last 50 years, along with all the ways that it's kind of facing these new challenges. So one way I think about it is this kind of bringing light and awareness to the principal agent dilemma. One big learning or insight from the kernel readings had to do with the observation that Web3 systems allow us to shift our trust from the people who set up the infrastructure that allows us to connect with other people to the actual people on the other end of that connection, which is sort of the purpose of it. In any case, the three properties or principles that I'm kind of coming to land on for that describe Web3 systems, and I don't know if any Web3 system perfectly adheres to all three. They sit in tension with each other to some extent, but they're that Web3 systems are open, Web3 systems are durable, and Web3 systems are consensual. And I think to this last point on consensual, I don't think the problem is so much that Facebook is extracting my data and, it's that it's doing it without my consent. And it's doing that without my informed consent or my full awareness of what kind of is going on behind the scenes and the ways in which that is impacting me and the world around me. In any case, each of those words I've kind of really carefully thought of, because bundled under each one is all sorts of these tactics and strategies we talk about, like open source, open data, open access, verifiable, incentive aligned, opt-in, all of this stuff you can kind of attach underneath each one of those adjectives. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I'll just offer that as a couple of cents.
Thank you, John. Perhaps we keep rolling with new voices, Bradley, if you'd like.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Bradley from Myanmar. So I learned a lot from Akasha's presentation and about Web 2 and Web 3. And I'm just really just a dummy for the Web 3 and blockchain stuff. And here I have more problems than the answers. So I'm from Myanmar. Myanmar is now in the state of war. And I want to ask about like two scenarios. One is like we were talking about these Web3 ecosystems and its resilience, and also how it is decentralized, and be it can be like the next internet or resilient infrastructure. So in Myanmar, in most of the areas, there are very limited internet access. So is it possible to deploy the Web3 based like content moderation, content hosting, like websites, or is it possible to just deploy the Web3 systems in places with very limited or like no internet, like no internet situation, like so is it possible? I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if it is possible or not. And another one is the circumvention. Right now, the military in Myanmar is raising a lot of like capacity in surveillance, and China is backing the military. And when it comes to circumvention, the Web 2 and the conventional circumvention tools, we don't see a lot of improvement in that area. And when I look at Web3's concepts and claims, I see the censorship resistance and kind of resistance tech kind of sense. So is there like any kind of tools or concepts or any kind of valuable resource that you want to discuss about the circumvention? Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. Yeah. I wonder, I mean, Alex, you actually have your hand raised. If you're willing, it may be the right.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, quite interesting the question about how to have Web3 without internet. And I know there are some research about also having Web3 with on some microcontroller MCU. So some experiment, but I would not know what to say more. I had a thought about information, data, and power. And it's also a bit connected with what I tried to say yesterday. So maybe something banal, like something obvious, but like the value of information is in relation to who own them. So let's say I know the amount of money that each of you receive from your, I don't know, daily job. That means that I have a lot of power because I can make you an offer, like a specific offer to everyone. But if that information are public, and so every one of us know the actual salary of each one of us, then it's quite different in terms of power. And I think that this is the, I mean, can be the difference between Web 2 and eventually Web 3. Because it is true that, I mean, someone said it before, that, I mean, we compensate the people that are hosting server or services because they are paying for electricity, they are coding, and so on. And yeah, these things about who own the information, because yeah, owning the information is good. I mean, so we are sovereign on our data, but at the same time, I think we should be sovereign on all the data, not just like the data that I produce is not just my data, is also your data. In a way, like it's like if I write a book, I write a book, and of course it's my, let's say, intellectual activity, then it became also intellectual property. But also what I read, I mean, what I write, it's based on what I've read in the past. And so I cannot really say that what I produce is produced by myself, but I would say that it's just the result of a lot of work that has been done by other people before me. And at the same time, I think that also, like, if I produce data, then it's not just my data, it's the data of everyone. Like, I don't know, my heartbeat that then is saved somewhere can be used by someone else for health reasons. So just this thought about relation of power and data, and yeah, what I wish could be a collective data ownership. I don't know. Yeah, sorry for the confusion.
It's good. It's good. It's good to talk these things through. I do want to take it back to the module a bit because we're getting closer to the end of the fireside. I mean, the suggestion was that this idea of ownership that has been like talked a lot about, it to us, it's kind of when Akasha's talking about like being stuck in the client server architecture thinking, it makes it difficult to think beyond it. It's like, well, the corporations own our data, so then the immediate response is, no, we should own it. But the suggestion is to see it like, are there other responses? Are there more creative responses than saying, no, we should own it? Or might there be other paradigms? And so that's where, like in the module, it says this part here, it says augment our ability to think for ourselves, reclaim our time, extend our ability to cooperate. And Bradley, I want to come back to some of your questions. I think in the future weeks too, we may have more ideas on like resilience technologies, and there are people that have come through kernel working on those types of things. But it's a part that Justin ended up quoting yesterday in the Learn Junta. It says, the materials in this module do not sum up to an argument for sovereignty in the sense so often used in crypto, nor do we make a case for ownership or control in a narrow, individualistic, or autonomous manner. And then there's a poem by Margaret Atwood, and then there's a link to this idea about signing. So traditionally, ownership is about control and possession. How can we use technology to cultivate more reciprocal relationships? This is just kind of like an exploration that's done there, but it has to be balanced. Like, I guess when I think about Bradley's questions, like you have individual like creation and this sense that, you know, each person should be rewarded for their own contributions and for the value that for becoming a person of value. I think in some sense, becoming a person of value is its own reward. There's a quote like, don't become a person of success, become a person of value. And then these rewards come back. But then like, how do we acknowledge the shared nature of creation is also a big important thread. I wonder maybe if we go to Justin now, and maybe Akasha, we could come back to you from there and see if you have any other like closing level thoughts.
Okay. Also, maybe I don't know if Daniel wants to go before I do, but I can go now too. Oh, okay. My face is skipping. It's intense. It's gonna be good. All right. Yeah, I think what I was gonna say was something like, yeah, Akasha, as I was listening to the presentation, one thing that came to me was this sense of, this is gonna sound like it's not true at all, but like actually some of the simplicity actually comes into the building or designing of the protocol itself. Like sometimes when you're in Web 2 or you're new to the space, building a protocol sounds like the most intense thing that I could ever imagine having to do, because it's like, what does it even mean? But when you kind of broke it down, I was like, oh, it's actually not even the most challenging thing about really bringing about Web 3 is actually some of the more it is technological challenge and breakthrough, but also some of it felt like more of the social, cultural thought pattern milieu by which we have to restructure what it means to you know, I guess like to build and encode these shared values and truths. But you didn't say this words, but that's kind of what I took at some level. But also I think part of what I heard you say was like, and also continue learning how to transcend and include what has come before us in Web 1 and Web 2. So instead of thinking that we're like revolutionary, and so like, you know, F the system, we need to leave it all behind. Like what, you know, these old people didn't know what they're doing. They don't know the problems of our time. It's more like, actually, we need to really understand where we came from, what is that we're currently in, and then actually begin to see what it means to make, you know, evolutionary progress in response to what's going on in the world around us. which I think is a very different energy than maybe what started out Web3. Like it used to be this rebellious call against something, but I think now it's just kind of a practical reality. Like this is the nature of what things are, and you find your place in that thing or not. But also we want to, I think this group wants to help as many people find their way into it in the most seamless transition, because we know that it is here. And it's like this, it's just an emerging future truth. It's just kind of what it is. And so I left there feeling some sense of like simplicity, because I thought the ambition of what I wanted to do was in the protocol, but I noticed that the ambition of what my learning question is like, how can I architect a blockchain protocol that develops an infrastructure for human development and coordination, one that harmoniously honors individuation, provides communion, serves humanity, and reveres Earth kinship. And I think, the ability to define the rules of individuation, communion, service to humanity, or what humanity actually is, and looking at revering Earth's kinship, I mean, those are all kind of, sociological, anthropological, ecological kind of contemplations, but it sounds like, getting all that defined and then bringing that back into the protocol layer, maybe that is still complex, but maybe there's actually a simplicity to that too. It's just beyond my knowing. So I feel like that was kind of coming through. And if I said one more thing, I get the sense too that like maybe something that I get from Kernel and from our reading was like, well, actually, because we're humans and we're humans building technology, and we know that we are evolutionary beings, maybe the things that we're doing in Web3 are actually just coming about very naturally as our bodies and systems respond to the nature of our changing reality. And so the more we're able to care for and cultivate our sense of self and find our place in the world and find right boundaries and right ways to collaborate and communicate and believe and see and work and do, all these coordination kind of challenging issues, the more our technology has the possibility to reflect something true. But I think a lot of the conversation we're having around big systems and big topics like regeneration and extraction, I think I noticed that one of the things that comes back to is like, what do I choose to do? Like, how do I choose to be in the context of this reality or in collaboration with others? And how does that shape the nature of what I'm building as technology? And maybe how I use it too. And so I was feeling that kind of emerging possibility from our conversation too, just kind of always coming back to the self, not selfishly, but moving towards something greater than our individuality.
Vivek, can I say like a quick follow-up to Justin's point?
Please.
Just real quickly, Daniel, not to take any time from you. That's just that's something I've been contemplating for a while, but it's more of like a specific point at the end. And it's just, I think people, whether or not we build Web3 systems or, the extent of the progress we make on building like tangible, useful, etc, like stuff, I think people want new ways to engage online. And that was evident in the Clubhouse craze that happened. I think it's evident in no matter how many social media apps we have, people are still building like event management apps, or I forget the name of it, like Be Real. Like folks want like Instagram, Twitter, as much as successful as they are, they're not the end all be all for like all the different permutations of human communication and expression that people want to express. So although like the people want to do, so although like your ideas may sound like esoteric in some ways, I think they're practical in a way of like whether or not they're articulated exactly how you said, right? Like I think people want those ways, like want new ways to interact regardless, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Daniel, if you'd like, love to hear from you.
Thank you, Vivek. Awesome. I have 2 points I will try to connect. The last one that will become the first one, let's following up Bradley's point. I think I would like to drop to the conversation how can we educate people about how to use better the internet and how they can leverage better their data. Because right now, even though this has been an amazing conversation, it feels more like the technical underlying principles of how we build rather than how we educate the people to use better the internet. One very important point about the lecture was to own the internet, you need to participate. But most of the times, following up with Bradley's point is in Latin America, most of Web3 adoption comes from stable coins to make remittances. And I'm sure that if you ask a person in Venezuela or in Argentina about their data privacy, they won't care about it. They care that they have much better forex rates when they move money from the US to their countries or move dollars, because that's the problem you're trying to address. For me, a question is really important to answer, and kind of not in this specific conversation, but in kind of in general, is can we make this internet or business as I was for a while listening in this huge AI blockchain trend. Was really interesting to see the promise of infinite logic, infinite knowledge, balanced by the promise of the scarcity of the blockchain. That I think that it's a great balance in the end. But if you don't know how it works, if you don't relate to that because you're looking to solve more basic problems in your life, you won't be part of it. And if you want to own the internet, you need to understand that to participate. So yeah, the question that I want, or the reflection that I want to drop is, how can we make this kind of conversations more relatable to average people? I don't like to say average, like we're literally something that to more common users, to people that are downloading OKX to wire money from Venezuela to Colombia, from Venezuela to the US, or other words, or here in Mexico. No? So yeah, that's my point. Thank you.
I think at least for me, like this conversation, wide ranging, lots of different perspectives shared, and definitely through listening, you find like how big the web is and how many different things that people want. I think even in this call, just representing so many of those different possibilities. But maybe, Keisha, if you don't mind, the ask would be to try to reflect on the conversation, but also like the chat, and and pick out like what has you excited. And it can be, I know, Daniel, this is different from what you're just bringing up, but it can be like more about like the technical implementations, or the simplicity, or any of the points that you want to drive home there.
Yeah, like you said, it was such a wide-ranging conversation. And that, like, I think that's the fundamental point of Web3. I like the story of the electric carriage, which is this idea that when we were using like horse and buggy to get us around, we thought about integrating electricity into that system, but we couldn't yet imagine a car. We imagined a horse and buggy with some electrical components. We couldn't see beyond this system that we already had. And so when we think about transitioning from Web 2 to Web 3, I think about going back to first principles and thinking about what we actually want to do. In the horse and buggy example, it's like we want transportation. We want the ability to move and do so with less components. And when we kind of peel everything back, and the reason why I went a little bit more of a technical perspective, hopefully it didn't feel like a technical talk, but just like from a technical point of view, was that if you see everything from its first principles, to Justin's point, zero principles, yeah, zero knowledge, zero principles, who knows? But I think to Justin's point, if we kind of peel everything back into these like simple sections, our ability to reason about it becomes 10 times easier. So that people who are in circumstances like Bradley, who are asking much different questions, can now say, okay, I have some type of foundation to reason on. I see that blockchain is for coordination. I see that there's protocols and there's state machines. How can I use it off chain or offline? How do I build these systems around it? So like peeling everything back to its first principles is from a technical perspective, and also understanding constraints, I think is and constructive. And then once you do that, then you start to ask new questions, both like I said about Bradley, but then also more broadly, like the reason why I started building. Because I was like, yeah, it's simple to understand everything's a protocol on a state machine, but those tools don't give me what I need to build what I want. So how do I build a system that gives me exactly what I want and the flexibility I desire? And how do I make trade-offs about ownership, control, convenience, and all these other things? And so I hope that this is just a series of continued conversations, a series of like frameworks that we continue to reason about. And that like maybe even as like a kernel block, we kind of come up with our, instead of a like, electric carriage, we come up with our own version of a car and how we want Web3 to work for us. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that encouragement and for the time today, Keisha and everybody. We'll come back next week with another office hours and internet age institutions. We have really good week plan next week. Should be pretty simple, standard, what you're used to at this point. And then the week following is Expo. Yeah, just like a couple of shout outs to like this ideas like blockchains are state machines. We can think about how simply our computers could interact with them and the different types of interactions that we can make. Maybe that's the area to call to action around and to think beyond ownership towards our own activity in the world and how it can make us feel more or less free and how we aim for that. Want to especially call out Bradley. Thanks for sharing, and we'll definitely get back to some of your thoughts in the days to come. Take care, everybody. We'll talk really soon.
This was fun.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Acacia. Thank you, Lily.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you.